Hello everyone and welcome to Global Azure Bootcamp. In this session, we are going to look at Azure App Service app deployments. Now, before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Janhavi Anturkar. I am an Azure technical trainer with Microsoft Worldwide Learning Team based in Melbourne, Australia. Prior to being a trainer, I have worked as a consultant, as an architect, and as a senior premier field engineer focusing on Office 365 and Azure. Now, this session we have today, we are going to talk about different options we have to deploy our applications to Azure App Service. So Azure App Service is an HTTP-based service for hosting your web applications, your REST APIs, and your mobile backends. Now you can develop in your favorite language. It can be .NET, .NET Core, Java, Ruby, Node.js, PHP, or Python. And applications, they run and scale with ease on both Windows and Linux-based environments in Azure App Service. Now this session, it assumes you have basic understanding of Azure App Service web apps. Now before we talk about different deployment options, we need to understand a concept which is called as deployment slots or staging slots. Now these deployment slots or staging slots, they are live applications with their own host names. Now when we deploy our web app in Azure App Service, we can use a separate deployment slot instead of the default production slot. Now to be able to do this, we need to make sure that we are running our application in standard, premium, or isolated application service plan tier. App content and configuration, it can be swapped between two deployment slots, including your production slot. So we can use them to validate our application changes in staging deployment slot before swapping it with production slot. Now deploying an app to a slot first and swapping it into production, make sure that all instances of the slot, they are warmed up before being swapped into production. This then helps in eliminating downtime when you deploy your application. The traffic redirection happens seamlessly and no request will be dropped because of the swap operation. After a swap, the slot with previously staged app now has got your previous production app. So if in case you want to go back to that app, you can run a swap again and you will be able to go to that app. So you can create different apps. Now depending on the tier, you might have 10 or 20 or more slots that you can create. So here, for example, we have got a dev slot. Now you could directly swap between dev and production, or if you want, you could do from dev to test and then test here, then go to QA and then test here and then go to staging, test here, and then from staging, maybe you want to go to production. So you could do this way as well. So these are different slots that we have created. Now, how do we deploy? Okay, how do we deploy our applications? So we have got different options for deploying applications. There are about 8 different options that we are going to look at. Now, you can deploy using your zip file or a WAR file. You can run from a package. You can make use of that zip file and just directly run from that zip file. You can deploy via Cloud Sync. You can also make use of FTP for your deployment. You can deploy continuously using different tools. You can deploy from your local Git as well, and you can deploy using a template, which is a ARM template that you are going to use, which is a JSON based template. And you can have custom container deployments using CI/CD as well. So we are going to look at all these different options. So we'll start with deploying using a zip or WAR file. Zip file deployment uses query service for deployment. So when you're using zip deploy, files will only be copied if their timestamps don't match what is already deployed. This zip deployment, it supports deletion of files which are left over from previous deployments. You can turn on default build process, which includes package restore. You can customize your deployment using deployment scripts, and there is a file size limit of 2 gigs. A WAR file deployment, it deploys your WAR file to app service to run your Java web app. To deploy using zip deploy, you create a zip file first, then use CLI or REST API or PowerShell to deploy the file. To deploy using Azure CLI, you are going to make use of AZ web app deployment and then source, and then you have to say config zip, and then you're going to pass your zip file name. Okay. Now by default, the deployment engine, it assumes that the zip file is ready to run as is and doesn't run any build automation. Now you can enable the build automation if you want. All you need to do is you need to make sure that you have set this up, which is SCM do build during deployment to true. Once you do that, you can again call the same command, which is AZ web app deployment and source config, and then you pass your zip file name. And this way you will be doing the build during that deployment. You can use REST API. So here's an example of how you can use REST API. And you can also use PowerShell. So when you're using PowerShell, you are going to make use of publish AZ web app command, and then you have to pass the zip file name. For the WAR file also, you have got same options. You can use PowerShell, it's the same command. You can use here curl to post, so using REST API. Okay, so let's see this zip deployment in action. Now for the demo, I have already created my web application in Azure portal. So I'm going to go to my Azure portal here. And if we go into app services, I have got 3 different web applications for different demos. Now I'm going to pick up this one for this particular demo. Now in this particular web application, this is a Windows-based .NET web application that I have got. And I have configured multiple deployment slots to do the deployment from different sources. So we are going to do the zip deployment, which I'm going to deploy to this particular slot, which is the zip deploy slot here. Okay, so let's open up the code and do the deployment. So here I have my Visual Studio Code, and this is my .NET application. Okay, and we are going to deploy this using zip deploy. Now before deploying this application, let's see what do we have in this slot. So I'm just going to click browse, and we have got this application here, but this is not really a good header. Okay, there's some mistakes in here, so we want to fix it. So I'm going to go back to the Visual Studio Code, and we are going to open up the index file, and here I'm going to change this, and I'm going to call it welcome to Global Azure Bootcamp. Okay, and we will change this. So what I want to do is I want to do this H2, and I'm gonna say here this app is deployed using zip deploy, and we will change this. Okay, so we have got H2 here. Okay, so that's the change we have made to the application. Now we want to deploy this, so I'm just going to close this one. Now before we can deploy, we need to make sure we create publish. Now I already have a pub folder here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. Okay, and we are going to run this command .NET publish. So this has created this pub folder. Okay, I want to change to this folder, and we want to create a zip in this particular folder. Now because I am in PowerShell, this zip is not going to work, so I need to run compress archive. So I'm going to run this to create the zip file. Okay, so that's created the zip file. Let's go to the folder and we can see here we have got the site.zip. Now back to my CLI. Here I need to deploy, so I'm just going to close this. And here we have Azure Web App Deployment. We have to configure the source to zip, and then we have to enter the zip file name, and then we are going to deploy that to a particular slot. So I'm going to use this line here to deploy to this particular slot, which is my zip deploy slot. So same command, I have just added this slot option in here. So let's go run this one. So the deployment has started. We can see here the status code is returned 202 and the deployment has been finished. Now let's go back to Azure portal and refresh our page. Not this one. Let's go here. And I'm going to click browse. And you can see we have got the change that we made. So welcome to Global Azure Bootcamp, and this app is deployed using zip deploy. So back to our code again. So here you could achieve the same thing using PowerShell, and we have to use this publish Azure web app, and then you can use it. So that's how we can do the deployment using zip deploy. Next, we are going to look at run from a package. So all the deployment methods in your app service, they deploy the files to either your D home/home/site/www root directory in Windows, and in Linux it deploys to /home/site/www root. Okay, so this is for Linux. Now, since the same directory is used by your app at runtime, it's possible for a deployment to fail because of a file lock conflict. And for the app to behave unpredictably because some of the files are not yet updated. So the next option to deploy your app is you run from a package. Now here you can run your apps directly from the deployment zip package file. So when you run directly from that package file, the files in the package, they are not really copied to the www root directory. Instead, the zip package itself gets mounted as a read-only www root directory. Now there are several benefits of running directly from the package. So it eliminates this file lock conflicts between your deployment and runtime. It also ensures that only full deployed apps are running at any time, and it can be deployed to production app with a restart. It also helps you improve the performance of your Azure Resource Manager deployments, and it may reduce the cold start times, particularly for JavaScript functions with large NPM package trees. So to run from a package, you need to create a zip file first. And this is only currently supported for zip package. Okay, so it's only supports zip package. Now, before creating the zip package, run all the build tasks like your npm, your bower, your gulp, or composer, pip. Run that and make sure that you have all the files you need to run that app. Then create the zip archive of everything in your project. So for example, if you have got a .NET project, this folder is the output of your .NET publish command. Before you can run it though, you have to make sure that you have enabled it to run from the package. And for that, we need to set up this, which is website run from package. And we need to set it to 1. Now, once you set that up, then you are able to run this. So Azure Web App Deployment, and then you are going to give the config zip, and then here you have the zip file name. Because you have now set up as run from the package, that zip file will not be extracted. It will be mounted as is as a www root directory there, and your application will run from that package. You can also run a package from an external URL, like your Azure Blob Storage. So you can use Azure Blob Storage Explorer to upload your package files to your Blob Storage account, and then you can run your deployment or run your application from that external URL there. Next option we have is you deploy via Cloud Sync. So you might be working from multiple devices and your code is synced to cloud service like maybe OneDrive or Dropbox. So you can use Cloud Sync to deploy your applications from OneDrive or Dropbox. You can work with your app code and content in a designated cloud folder and then sync to app service with the click of a button. So here OneDrive for Business is not supported. So you have to make sure you have got either your personal OneDrive and you have got your Dropbox. Okay, so let's see how this works. And we are going to sync from OneDrive. So I've got this web application here in my Azure portal. Okay, and this is a simple .NET application again. Now we want to configure OneDrive, so we need to go to this option here, which is Deployment Center. And then in there, I have got this option here for OneDrive. So let's choose that. And you can see that I'm already signed in. This is because I have configured this earlier on other applications. Okay, so my identity is there. So it's taken that identity and then it creates a folder here. So you can see here I have got different applications for which there are folders created. Now I know that I have got a code in here which I can deploy to this particular application. So I'm just going to choose that particular folder and then I'm going to click save. If I choose the other one, which is this one, then what is going to happen is it's going to create a new folder in my OneDrive here. So when you connect your OneDrive with Azure App Service, then there is this Azure Web Apps folder created in your OneDrive, and then inside that there will be folders for each application that you are connecting with. And then there you can have your code and you can deploy from there. Okay, so I do have an application in here in this folder, so I'm going to make use of that to deploy from this in this application. So let's save this. Now once we save, for the first time it will automatically start a deployment. Okay, so we go here and click refresh a couple of times and we will see the deployment coming in shortly in here. And what this is going to do is it's going to deploy from this particular folder to that application that we have just created. Okay, so let's see if we have, so here we go, we have got this deployment happening which is currently pending. So it's synchronizing the changes from your OneDrive there. Once this is deployed, we will see that our application is coming up. So let's browse. So you can see here that we have got our application, which is the global Azure Bootcamp.NET application that we have created earlier. So, but this time we have made the change and it's syncing from the Cloud Sync. Okay, so that's how you can deploy from your OneDrive, or if you have a Dropbox, then you choose Dropbox and then sign in, and then you'll be able to sync or deploy your code from Dropbox as well. Sometimes you may want to use FTP or FTPS to deploy your application. When you create an app service web app, FTP endpoint is activated for that app automatically. To deploy your app, you can use FTP client like your Visual Studio or CyberDuck or WinCSP to connect to the site. And the connection information that is available in the overview blade of your app on the Azure portal or on the deployment center. So for example, if I go to my Azure portal, here I have got this application. If I go to the overview blade, in the overview blade, it is going to show me the information about the FTP and FTPS host. So you can see here, I have got this FTP host name and I have got the FTPS host name. Okay. The other option we have is we can go to this deployment center here. And in the deployment center, we have got FTPS credentials. Now this is where you can get this FTPS endpoint and you also have got the user details. So there's application scope user and there's a user scope user that you can use in this scenario. Okay, and your code that is going to be deployed is going to go to this particular site directory, which is your site slash www root directory. Okay, so you copy your files and respect and your directory structure in this particular directory. Now, if you have got web jobs, then you can copy your files to slash site slash www root slash app data, so app underscore data slash jobs. So this is for your web jobs if you want to copy the files for that. Okay. Now this FTP deployment, it doesn't support deployment automation like your dependency restores. So if you have got, let's say, NuGet packages or NPM or PAPE or Composer, okay, it doesn't support the compilation of .NET libraries, and it doesn't support generation of your web config. So you'll have to generate all these necessary files manually on your local machine and then deploy them together with your app to that particular folder there. Now for enhanced security, you should allow FTP over TLS and SSL only. And if you do not want to use FTP, then it's a good idea to disable both FTP and FTPS to make your application secure. All the options that we have seen so far are good when you're just trying out things, maybe for the demos or just starting your dev. In most of your organizational scenarios, you'd probably be working in a team and have a source control system to manage the source code of your application. And you want to deploy your app from there, then you may want to deploy continuously as well. So Azure App Service, it enables continuous deployment from GitHub, it enables deployment from Bitbucket, and you have got Azure repos, which you can use for deploying continuously. So you will be pulling the latest updates as you check in or you push your code and then deploy that to your Azure App Service. Now to use Azure repos, you need to make sure that your Azure DevOps organization is linked to the Azure subscription you have got. And for Bitbucket or GitHub, you need to authorize Azure App Service to connect to your repository. You only need to authorize with the source control service once. Now, after you authorize your source control service, configure your app for continuous deployment using built-in either app service build server, or you can use pipelines, and there are different other options. So let's see what all we have to do to configure continuous deployment. First thing you need to do is you need to prepare your repository. So you need to make sure that you have got the correct files. For example, if you are in .NET, you want to make sure that you have got these SLN, CSproj, or the default.aspx files. If you are in ASP.NET Core, then you want to make sure you have got these files here. If you are in PHP, then you want to make sure you have got index.php. For Ruby, the gem file. For Node.js, either server.js or app.js or package.json with the Sass script. For Python, you can have a .py file or requirements.txt or runtime.txt. Normal HTML, if you have, then you have all the default or the index type of HTML. And for your web jobs, you need to make sure you have got this. Okay, you can also customize your deployment, and you can include a .deployment file in your repository root so that you can customize your deployment. Once you have got that, you want to select your source and then the build provider. Now for the source, we have got different options. So we can go with Azure repos, you can go with GitHub, you can go with Bitbucket, and you then select corresponding build provider. So for example, if you are using GitHub, then you have got GitHub Actions as a resource, you have got App Service build service, or you have got Azure Pipelines as your build provider. And then if you are using Azure repos, then you could make use of App Service build service, which is the default, or you can also make use of Azure Pipelines in there. So you've got those different options. Once you have selected your build provider, make sure you have authorized. So authorize app service to connect to your service, maybe Azure DevOps or GitHub or Bitbucket. Okay, so if it's Azure DevOps, then you need to link your DevOps organization to your Azure subscription. If it's a GitHub or Bitbucket, you need to authorize app service to connect to your repository, and then we will be able to configure that continuous deployment. So let's look at the demo how we can configure deployment continuously with different tools. So I'm going to go to my Azure portal first, and here I have my Node.js application. Okay, so I've got this Node.js application. Let's browse and see what we have got. So this is just a sample code that I have got here. Now I want to update this with my application. So we have got this Node.js application, and I also have got a Git repo here. So this is my application. This is where all my source code is. Okay. Now I want to configure deployment from this particular source code to my Node.js application. So to configure, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to Azure portal. Now in the Azure portal, we have got this option which we have seen earlier, which is deployment center. So we go to this deployment center, and in here under settings, we have got this option to select the source. Okay. So in the source option, we have got here GitHub, Bitbucket, or you can have local Git. You can also make use of Azure DevOps, which I'm going to show you in the next demo. So here we are going to use GitHub. Now once I select GitHub, you can see here I have got this option, building with GitHub Actions. Okay, now you can change and you can choose here either App Service Build Service, or you can also choose Azure Pipelines if you want. Now I'm going to keep default, which is GitHub Actions, and I need to make sure that I have authorized. So here you can see I'm signed in, so I have already authorized App Service to connect to my GitHub account. And here I need to select my organization. So it's my organization. I need to select my repo. So this is my Node.js app. And then I need to select my branch. Now I just have one branch for this demo, so I'm just going to go with that main branch. Now I have another workflow in here. So it says here that use available workflow. So there is one workflow available, or I want to add another. So I want to add another workflow here. So I'm going to add this, select this. And then runtime stack, it will choose automatically. Version also, it will choose automatically. And you can see here your preview file. So this is your YAML file, which has got all the information about that deployment. And this will be triggered whenever there is push happening on this main branch. Okay. And you can see here that it's building that Node.js application, running it on Ubuntu, and then here it is deploying on this Azure App Service web app. So let's close this, and I'm going to save this one. So once this is saved, what this is going to do is it will start up a deployment as soon as you save it. So this has already started this deployment. Also, when we go to our code repo, here you can see we have got this file. So my web application name is gap node.js. Okay, so it has copied that workflow file here under GitHub workflows, and you have got that full workflow file appearing in here. And when you go to your GitHub Actions, you see that here that deployment has already started. So once this deployment is done, our application will be updated with that code from that source control repository I have in GitHub. So you can see here that we have the deployment succeeded. Okay, now let's browse. And you can see the site has been updated. We have got the application that we deployed from that Git repo. Okay, so same thing you can also do from Azure DevOps. So if your application is in Azure DevOps, if your source is in Azure DevOps, you can deploy it from there as well. And you can create the pipeline, or you can use the Azure App Service Build Server. Okay, now I'm going to show that in another application. So here we go in this particular application. So this is a .NET application here, and I'm going to go to Deployment Center. Actually, let's do it in another slot. So here we have got this slot. So I'm going to do it in this particular slot. Let's go to Deployment Center here. And once the setting loads, we will choose Azure DevOps here. So here we have different options. So here I'm going to go with Azure DevOps. And you can change the bill provider if you want. So default is your app service, bill service. Change provider will show you option of Azure Pipelines. Now, if you choose this Azure Pipelines option, it will say that you should configure this from the DevOps portal itself. So when you go to the DevOps, you have got that option of creating pipelines, so you can configure it directly from there. Or you can say that, okay, I don't want pipelines, I just want the default one, and you can go from here and then select your organization. So this is DevOps organization, and then choose your project, choose your repository, and then choose the branch. So let's say I want to deploy from my dev branch, so I can choose that branch here, and then you can save. So once this is saved, it will start the deployment from this Azure repo that I have got, Azure DevOps repo. Okay, so we have got here, we need to click sync. So here you can see we have got the deployment running, and this will be using the bill provider, which is app service bill provider. Now I could also do this using Azure pipeline, but for that I need to go to my Azure DevOps. So this is my Azure DevOps here. Okay, I've got my code, and in here what I can do, I can create a pipeline. So we have got pipelines option here. So we can go to pipelines, and you can see I already have a pipeline created here, or I can even create a new pipeline. Now in the pipeline, what I have got, I'm just going to click edit, and then we'll see what's in the pipeline. So this is similar to that GitHub YAML file that we created earlier. So this is the same again YAML file, and we have got here, I'm just going to minimize these tasks. And here you have the trigger, and then this is running on Windows, and it's building this .NET project, so .NET Restore and .NET Build, and then publishing it and creating artifacts. Okay, now these artifacts we can take and then we can deploy. So for that we go into release. Okay, so we go in releases here, and in releases I'm just going to edit this to show you what I have got. So in release, what I have got different stages. So here this is going to run whenever I create the build pipeline. The build pipeline runs, and after that the artifacts are created. So you have got the trigger here. So this is enabled on create a release every time a new build is available, and then create a release every time a new version of the selected artifact is available as part of the pull workflow. So for both, this is going to run. And then after that, it's going to run this particular stage, which is deploy to Azure. And there is one job here. So we can see what the job is. And here we have deploy Azure App Service. And this particular job is going to deploy to Azure App Service using Resource Manager. So connection type is Resource Manager. I've selected my subscription here. I've got my Windows app because the app that I have got is Windows, and then app service name is here. I can deploy to slot. So here I have to choose deploy to a slot or app service, and then I can choose a different slot as well. So here I can choose different slots. Okay, or I can deploy to production directly from here. And then I've got the package folder information and things. You can set up additional things like post deployment actions and application and configuration settings, or output variables and things like that. So you can choose all that. You can add another task if you want in here. You can also set up your variables. So that's my release pipeline that I can create direct from the DevOps, and then it will start deploying. So whenever I push some new code, it will create that artifact, build artifact, and then it will deploy that to my web application there. So that's another mechanism. So you could use either app service build provider, or you could use the Azure pipelines, and you can use the release pipeline from here. Now here we have configured the app service build provider, and this is says that it's success. So let's browse this. And here we go. We have got the application deployed here. It's the bootcamp application that we have got in here. Okay, so from here, in the repos, I have got my code, and from here it has been deployed. So that's how you can deploy continuously from GitHub or your Azure DevOps or from Bitbucket to Azure App Service. Now you can also deploy from your local Git. Now to deploy from your local Git, you have to prepare your repo and then configure a deployment user and then create Git enabled app or configure existing app and then deploy that web app. Now configuring or preparing your repository means the same thing. You have to make sure you have got all the right files available in there. Okay, and you can also customize by using that .deployment file. Once you have done that, you can enable the deployment user. So you can have a user level credential or you can have app level credential. User credentials is a set of credentials for the entire Azure account. It can be used to deploy to app service for any app in any subscription that your Azure account has got permission to access. So this is default set that surfaced in the Azure portal. Now, user level credentials, it can be configured using Azure CLI or from the portal. The username that you are creating, it needs to be unique in Azure, and for local Git pushes, it must not contain @symbol. The password must be at least 8 characters long with 2 of letters, numbers, and symbols. So when a user is granted app access via role-based access control or RBAC, or has got co-admin permissions, that user can use their own user level credentials until the access is revoked. You should make sure that you don't share these credentials with any other user if you're using those RBAC credentials. Second option you have is to make use of app level credentials. So this app level credentials is a set of credentials for each app, and it can be used to deploy to that app only. Now the credentials for each app, they are generated automatically at app creation and they can't be configured manually, but you can reset them anytime. For a user to be granted access to app level credentials via RBAC, that user must be either contributor or higher on that app. Readers, they are not allowed to publish and they can't access these credentials. You can get these credentials by running this. So Azure Web App Deployment list publishing profiles, and then you can get that. You'll get the URL by running here. You can also get the credentials directly from the portal. So when you go to the deployment center, you have got here FTP credentials. So the same credentials you are going to use. Once you have your user configured, you can create Git enabled app using Azure CLI by running az web app create with the deployment dash local dash git option. The output, it contains the SCMU Git URL, and you can also enable Git on existing app by setting the deployment source. So either create your new app or you can set it up on an existing app, and you have to say that source is config local git. You can also use PowerShell, and you have to use new az web app command to create the app. Now, when you run this commandlet from a directory which is already a Git repo, then it automatically creates a Git remote to your app service app. For an existing app, you set up SCM type. You can also configure Git from the portal after web app is created. Once you have all that configured, you can just use git remote add Azure to add that particular Git URI, and then you can just push. So git push Azure master. Okay. And you will be prompted with the Grid Credential Manager window where you can use either the user scope or your application scope credentials. So you don't sign in here with your Azure credentials, but use those user scope or application scope credential here. So let's look at the demo of how we can deploy from our local Git. For local Git, I have got my source code here locally in this Git repo. So this is Bootcamp application again in Visual Studio Code. And here I have got the CLI to deploy. Now this I'm going to deploy to this particular application. Okay, so again Windows.NET Core application I have. Now let's run these commands and see how it works. So for your username, if you haven't created it already, what you can do is you can generate a random username if you like and a random password. And then we need to run this command, which is az web app deployment user set, and then pass the username and password. Now I have already done this on my Azure subscription. So I've got the username and password created already. So I'm not going to run that command. Then if I want to get the application scope credentials, then I can run this where I will get the application scope credential. Okay, so if I run this, it's going to list out all the app scope credentials. Now I'm already logged into Azure, so using Azure login, AZ login, and here you can see I have got all these app credentials. So these app credentials are basically, it's the publishing profile. So you can also download this publishing profile from here. So get publish profile, and you can download that publishing profile from here. So we have got that. Now you can also get the URI. So if you want, you can run this command. So AZ web app deployment, and then we are targeting this SCM URI, which is what we want. So I'm just going to run that. And here you can see we have got this URI here. Okay, so I can make use of this to set up my local Git with deployment. Okay, if you are creating a new Git enabled application, then you can run this, okay, to create a new application. Now I already have an application, so I need to run this to configure that application for local Git deployment. So what I'm going to do is run this particular command here, which is going to set up my application for local Git deployment. And then here you can see it has given out this particular URL, which is the Git URL. So I'm just going to copy this and I am going to keep it in a notepad so I can use it later. Okay, so I've got this here. I can use it later. Now I can also get the publishing details again if I want from here. And then I want to deploy. Okay, so to deploy I have to set up this git remote add. Okay, now we have got this particular URL here, so I have to just run git remote add Azure, and then I have got this URL which is same as what is the output from here. So I am going to run that. Now you can see here that I'm getting an error. This is not a Git repo because this local Git is not really a Git repo. So I need to make sure I am in the correct folder. Okay, so my folder name is Bootcamp. So I need to make sure I am in correct folder. And then here again, I am going to run this command. Okay, so this is saying the remote already exists because I have already set that up. Now next what I need to do is I need to just run this git push Azure master. So I'm just going to enter that, and then it will bring up git credential manager. So you have got this git credential manager here. Now I know the password for this user because I've already created this user. So I'm just going to paste that here and click go. So this is going to do the deployment of my application. So the deployment is completed, deployment successful. Let's go to the browser and we are going to click browse. And here we have our application deployed. Next option we have for deployment is you deploy using a template, which is a Azure Resource Manager template. So here I have got a template, so Azure deploy.json. So this template, what this is going to do, it's going to create the web application, create a database, and then it is going to deploy the source code of my application as well. So here we can go and we can see here that it is going to deploy this multi-channel to-do application. So this is where the source is, okay? And this is the URL of the web application. That is where the source is going to be deployed. And we have the source code in the same Git repo here. So if you go to this to-do app, we have got this SRC, and then there is this multi-channel to-do web application here. So this web application you can deploy using this JSON file. You can just run this deploy to Azure from here, and you will see that it will make use of that template. So it makes use of that template in the source code there, and then it creates the web application. Here you have to pass on all the details like the site name and the host plan and the SQL Server details that you are going to need, and then you click review and create, and this is going to then deploy that application with that source code that we have, that we saw earlier. So here, so this source code, it is going to deploy that to your Azure subscription. So that's another mechanism you have to do your deployments using your Azure Resource Manager template. And finally, we have got containers. So your application may not be source code based, like you're not deploying your code directly. Maybe you want to publish a container. So you can deploy that container based application to your Azure App Service. You can enable continuous deployment from Azure Container Registry, or you can make use of Docker Hub, and you can make use of GitHub Actions, or you can use Azure Pipelines to build and deploy that container. So let's see how you can set up GitHub Actions so that you can deploy these containers. Now for this, you need to first define your steps and parameters in a YAML workflow file. Your workflow file will be available in .github/workflows folder path in your repo, like the other one that we saw earlier. So that's where your YAML workflow file is going to be. You have to have your subscription account subscription as a prerequisite. You have your GitHub account obviously, and you have to have a container registry. So you can have either ACR or you can make use of Docker Hub for your deployment, and you have to have your Azure App Service for containers, and then from there you can do the deployments. So here what you are going to do, first you need to generate your deployment credentials, then you are going to configure the GitHub secrets for authentication, you are going to configure GitHub secrets for your registry that you are going to use, and then you are going to build the container image and then deploy from that app service container. So let's see how we can set up GitHub Actions for your container. Now the recommended way to authenticate to your app service for GitHub Actions is using publish profile. So you can authenticate with a service principal or a publish profile. So you've got those options. So you save your publish profile credentials or service principal as a GitHub secret to authenticate with Azure. To configure the GitHub secret for authentication, you just go to the settings. So let's do that first. Now here on my Azure portal, I have got some app services. So I've got this container application. Okay, so I want to set up this container application here. Now for this container application, what you have to do is you need to get this publish profile. So this publish profile here is what will be used to set up that containerized application deployment. So we can click on get published profile, which downloads the published profile, and you can open the file and you can see here this is an XML file which has got all the published profiles details. So we can use that. So for that, what we need to do, go to our Git repo here. Okay, now I have got this container app. Okay, now in the workflows, I have got here this main my YAML file, which is going to do that deployment to that application, and I'll explain this workflow in a second. Let's first talk about the secrets. So here we have to go to settings and then go to secrets, and here you can see I have got created some secrets. So Azure Web App Publish Profile, so you need to have this one where you are going to add that published profile that you downloaded. So click update and then you update using that XML file that you have downloaded. You also need a registry password and username. Okay, so you need these two credentials. Now for this I am going to use Azure Container Registry. So I'm going to go to my container registry here, and for the container registry, to get the username password, you go into access keys, and here you will have your username and password. So you copy these and then you go back to your secrets and then you update them here. So you're going to need these three credentials because you want to be able to deploy to app service and you want to be able to log into Azure Container Registry so that you can pull the image of the container that you have created. So we need this, and after that we go to GitHub Actions. Now here you can create a new workflow and you can start with the blank workflow if you like, or you can choose from these templates that you have got here. Okay, now I already have a workflow, so I'm just going to explain you what this workflow does. Okay, so this workflow file that we have got, there are, I can see I have got a couple of runs here, and I'm just going to go back to code and we'll open up that YAML file here. And here we have, so you can see here we have got, it's going to run when there is a push happening to main branch. It is going to create this Docker image, so we need to have the image name. And then here this is logging into my container registry. If you are using Docker, then here you can use the Docker details. And then this is building the image and then pushing it. And then after that, what it is doing here is, here what this is doing, this is going to then deploy. So this bit here is actually deploying to that container application that I have got. And we need this published profile. So this published profile here is something that we downloaded and created the secret for. And this here is the name of that image that I am going to have in my container registry. Okay, now every time it deploys, it appends it with this github.sha so that we get a newer version in there. Okay, so that's what this is going to do. And for this, I have got a code in my local repo. So I'm gonna push the code and then we'll see this container deployment in action. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and here I am just going to make some change to the index file. So let's call this is demo 2, for example. Okay, so let's just add something here. And we have got our files, so let's add the files and say updated index file, add some comment, and then add your code and then sync it. So we do that. Now once this is done, so this is done here, we need to go back to our Azure repo and we go into GitHub Actions, and you can see here that for that particular push, it has already started the deployment. Okay, so we can go in here and we can see that there are different steps being run here. Okay, so this is going to do the deployment of our application. Now, while this is happening, let's observe what we have in the container registry. So in the container registry, we have got the repositories. Now, this is the container that we are creating. Now, I already have some options in here. Okay, so let's refresh that, and this uh, deployment will be created. This new tag will be created in here for the deployment that we are doing. Okay, so this container is then configured to run in this app service. So we have got here this app service. So this is the app service which is running that container, and we can see in the deployment center here, we have got the container registry information, and then we have got the image name, and then we have got the tag information. Currently, I have set this to off here. However, because we are doing it from GitHub Actions, it will automatically take that. So we can actually go in the logs, and you can see here that there is the deployment happening. Okay, so you can see from here that we have got the deployment happening in here. Okay, so let's go back to our actions. Now here it says that it has been completed. We can go in here and we can check all the different steps that were performed in here, and this has done the deployment also. And we can go back here and we can click browse to run that application. So here you can see this is demo 2. So that application we updated and we pushed the code, and now that's been deployed here in the form of containers. So that's how you can set up GitHub Actions for containers. You could also use Azure pipelines, and it's the same way to deploy your containers as well. You can do it from the Azure DevOps. So those were different methods you can use to deploy your application to Azure App Service. You have ability to deploy using simple mechanisms such as zip deploy or FTP or Cloud Sync, and you can also make use of continuous deployment where you can make use of GitHub and Azure DevOps and Bitbucket, or you can also use a local kit. Hope you find this useful. Thank you for listening to this session. Enjoy the rest of Global Azure Bootcamp.